Good morning. It's a beautiful Saturday here in North Carolina. Welcome back to Pastor's Morning Walk. I'm up an hour earlier because there's some yard work that needs to be done, and if it's not done early, it'll be very hot. I read in Job this morning, chapters 6 and 7. Job is desperate. He wants to die. He has already, in previous chapters, cursed the day of his birth. And now he wants to die, going so far as to saying that he prefers strangling to life. This is very sad that a believing man would be reduced to this. We cannot approve of all that Job says. He is, to a certain extent, captive to an ungodly despair, and though not an action, he is committing a sort of suicide in his heart. This is very different than the Apostle Paul, who in Philippians 1 says it's better to depart and be with Christ. Because there he's focusing on the positive blessing of being with Christ in heaven and not unduly desiring to be set free from the labors of this life. Indeed, he says, to remain here is fruitful labor, because for him to live is Christ, but to die is gain. There should be a sense in which every Christian would prefer to die. The life in heaven will be much better than this sad earthly life with our remaining sins and all the afflictions. But we should be content to live and not long to die inappropriately. Certainly not to refuse the burdens Christ wisely lays on us in this evil life. I would note that Job does not actually harm himself, though. And this is an encouragement and a warning to those who find themselves in despair. I say to you, as Peter did to the jailer, do thyself no harm. It is a great sin to commit suicide. It is a great sin to harm your own flesh. It's very unnatural. As Paul says in Ephesians 5, no man ever hated his own flesh, but nourisheth it and cherisheth it. This is what you ought to do. It is a gross lack of natural affection to harm yourself, and especially to kill yourself. And in most cases, it is a mark of ultimate despair, and like in Judas' case, a sealing of your own eternal condemnation. Now, it is possible that a believer can lapse so far as to commit suicide. David was a believer when he committed adultery and murder. But this is not an approval of it, nor would I give you assurance that if you kill yourself, you'll send yourself to heaven, so to speak. It is usually the mark of an unbelieving man that he would fall so low and he would play God, take his own life in his hands, and be so selfish as to deprive others of the benefit of his life, and to insult God by refusing to do the work and refusing to bear the burden that God has appointed for him. So I plead with you, do not harm yourself. Do not think about harming yourself. When these thoughts come, rebuke them sharply. Turn them away with abhorrence. Even rebuke Satan, who brings these temptations to you, and give yourself to live for God. I would note as well in Job 6 that he rebukes his friends for taking his despairing words too seriously. They want to see, in Job's words, some unbelief and reprove him for simply not trusting God. Now, God himself reproves Job, As I've already said, not all in his speech is worthy of approval. But that doesn't mean that we should think the worst of Christians when they say despairing things. It's possible that words of despair can have no sin at all. We have that, for example, with Christ upon the cross. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? It would be very ungodly and uncharitable to assert that Christ had lost the grace of faith and he was unbelieving and not submitting to God. Well, he certainly was. In fact, that's what the enemy said upon the cross. He trusted in God. Let him deliver him. Why aren't you trusting in God? We should never say that of Christ, nor should we ever say that of a Christian. We need to be very careful to be charitable. There are times when Christians say things that sound despairing or that are despairing in an ungodly way, and we need to be willing to let them pass by. Men under pressure find it easy to sin in certain ways. And we, of all people who have the same flesh, the same weaknesses, who no doubt have been under such pressures ourselves, need to be very patient and kind. It rubs salt in the wound of an afflicted man when there's no allowance given at all for some of his excesses in speech while he is in great trouble. So be patient and charitable to friends who are in distress. It's good to continue in the fourth commandment here, as the Lord's Day is tomorrow. And the last thing to mention is the duties of the fourth commandment, particularly the keeping of the Sabbath day, the first day of the week now in the New Testament, holy unto God. So the Shorter Catechism asks, how is the Sabbath to be sanctified? And I've always found its answer perfect. The Sabbath is to be sanctified by a holy resting all that day, even from such worldly employments and recreations as are lawful in other days, and spending the whole time in the public and private exercises of God's worship, except so much as is to be taken up in the works of necessity and mercy. So to put it in a word, worship is the duty of the day. It is, as the Old Testament says, a holy convocation. So it's a day especially for being called together, convoked, for the public worship of God. It's a great day for social worship outside the public worship, worship with family, worship with friends. It is a great day for private worship, to have your normal devotions, but to have them extended. And this then is the reason why we put aside our earthly work. The Catechism is right to extend this not merely to putting aside outward work, but putting aside all thoughts, words, and works that are unnecessary about our worldly employments and recreations, because it understands the principle. This is the same rule that's applied in other commandments. So when Christ says, it's not enough not to commit adultery, you may not lust after a woman in your heart or with your eyes. So it is in this commandment, in the fourth. If it's a holy day and God expressly tells us to put aside our work, we understand the principle is to give not just body, but soul, give mind, give lips to the holy work of the day, and to put aside all the rest, even if only in our heart. This should show you the depth of God's commandments. It should show you also the depth of the sin that men commit on the Sabbath. It's not enough to be able to keep the strictest blue laws, for example, and not go out to eat and not make others work and not go into your earthly employment, and that certainly is required. But what's going on in your heart? Are you enjoying your thoughts about the things of this earth on this heavenly day? If so, you're breaking the Sabbath. You need to repent. And this is also a help in preventing us from outward earthly works. If we can discipline the heart and the lips, then that makes it easier to discipline the body, so that it's unthinkable that we would go so far as to put our hand to our earthly employments on this heavenly day. Now, there are two objections that come here. They're common today, and sadly common in Reformed churches that profess the Sabbath, even that have that Shorter Catechism answer. in their doctrinal standards. One comes even from ministerial candidates. They'll take this as an exception to their standards and say, well, I don't think it's wrong to play Frisbee with my son on the Lord's Day. Well, I think the first answer is this misses the point of the day, which is holy worship. Isn't there something more heavenly that you can do with your son? You say you need to be a faithful father and serve your children. Yes, you do. So why don't you pray with your children? Why don't you read a spiritual book to your children? Why don't you talk to your children about the sermon? There are 100 things much more suited to the holy day than playing Frisbee. But a second answer is, I have young children, and I understand their bodily needs, and it is impossible for children simply to sit still all day. For adults, that may be the best way for them to keep the Lord's Day, and they're able to handle it. But for children, it's too much to expect. There has to be some measure of movement or play to keep them from going insane. We would not, for example, if we had animals, lock up a calf in the stall all Sabbath day, but we'll let him have some free rein outside. I think this is appropriate with children. It is a work of necessity and even of mercy to their weakness. But when we give these concessions to their weakness, we need to recognize that's what they are and help them learn to discipline their bodies for the best use of the Lord's Day. And then, in choosing the things that we concede them in their weakness, choose things that best suit the purpose of the day. There are things better than Frisbee to get their wiggles out, as we say. Why not take them on a walk, like I'm doing now? I am strict Sabbatarian, but I will, for my children's sake, go on a walk like this. But we will devote that walk to talking about spiritual things, even as I'm doing now with you. And so we're able to meet their bodily necessity, to prepare them for worship so they're not as antsy before the afternoon service, but also make good use of the day. Commitment to the principle of keeping the holy day holy will then help you discern how works of necessity and mercy are to be done. Another objection that comes is, well, the Westminster Shorter Catechism and the larger and the Confession neglect God's purpose in the commandment of physical rest. And they'll even draw on the second giving of the law in Deuteronomy, chapter 5. One motive added that thy servant may rest as well as you. Well, I think in light of the commandment, that is to be taken chiefly spiritually. What was the great sin of Egypt in not allowing the Israelites their Sabbath rest? It wasn't that they were working them too hard. That would be a sin against the sixth commandment. It was that they wouldn't let them worship God, which is a grievous sin against the fourth commandment. So, we need to not misinterpret. We could perhaps say that a secondary benefit of the Lord's Day is a break from servile labor. But taking necessary breaks for ourselves or for our employees is already a duty of the sixth commandment. We're not machines, and we're not to be treated like that on any day of the week, including Monday through Saturday. We do not need to change the purpose of the fourth commandment in order to secure some physical rest that we think is not supplied. I would challenge those who bring this objection. Against whom are you objecting? You might say against the Puritan, against the Covenanter, etc. But I think the Puritan and Covenanter, the Westminster Divines, have understood properly the purpose of the day and outlined its duties correctly, I would challenge you that your objection is against God. And this is hindering you from the duty of Isaiah 58:13 and 14, to call the Sabbath a delight, and to take a special delight in this central spiritual purpose of the day, to have a day set apart for worship, public and private, and to want to put away all earthly thoughts and words and works, primarily because you wish to devote this day to worship, because God is worthy of it. So check your heart and give yourself, the Lord's Day is coming tomorrow, give yourself to the holy worship of God on His holy day and call it a delight. The Lord bless you.